She stood chained to the church gate in her torn Sunday dress, a sign around her neck reading, "Wife to no one." The townsfolk watched in silence. No one dared help. Not the pastor, not even her neighbors. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The wind that morning had teeth in it. It scraped across the red dirt roads of Ash Hollow, kicking up brittle leaves and the scent of cold iron and dust. The church bell hadn't rung yet. Wouldn't for another hour, but already a small crowd gathered in stunned silence at the wrought iron gate. Some covered their mouths. Others just stared. Emma Whitlow stood chained between the posts, her hands bound by rusted shackles that cut against her skin. Her Sunday dress, blue calico with tiny faded asters, was ripped at the sleeve, exposing one shoulder to the bite of the wind. Her face was smeared with mud and blood, one lip cracked, her left cheek blooming purple beneath her eye. But her spine was straight, her chin lifted, and her eyes, those stubborn steel-gray eyes, didn't ask for mercy. The sign slung around her neck fluttered against her chest with every gust, "Wife to no one, servant to pride." No one dared touch it. A few women crossed themselves. Old Ruth Penley whispered, "She should have said yes." Beside her, Caleb Boone spat in the dirt and muttered, "She brought it on herself." Emma heard it all. She stood anyway. From inside the church, the pastor watched through a side window and drew the curtains closed. Across the road, the sheriff nursed his morning whiskey and turned his chair toward the wall. No one lifted a finger, not even the men who once praised Emma's pies, nor the mothers whose children she nursed through fevers. Gratitude had vanished with the sunrise. Henry Finch hadn't come to see the spectacle. He didn't have to. His power was the kind you didn't need to witness to know it was real. His ranch stretched across the valley like a disease, swallowing fence lines, poisoning wells, buying silence. He owned the judge, the sheriff, the grain depot. Now he wanted Emma, and she dared humiliate him. The message was clear. No woman said no and walked away clean. Emma didn't scream, didn't beg. She stood for 3 hours in the cold until the church doors creaked open and the first hymn rang out, trembling like a lie. People stepped past her to worship. No one looked her in the eye. By the time the sun rose high, her fingers were numb, her lips pale, but her posture remained unbroken. Not pride, conviction. She wasn't trying to be brave. She was simply refusing to be small. And that refusal, more than the chains, terrified them all. Emma's shutters stayed closed long after the townsfolk forgot what had happened, or chose to. But she hadn't forgotten. The ache in her wrists spoke each morning louder than any voice in Ash Hollow ever did. Her garden shriveled in the frost. Her father grew quieter, thinner. Meals came in silence. The house no longer smelled of cinnamon or soap, just damp wood and old grief. The girl who once sang hymns under her breath while scrubbing the kitchen floor now moved like a ghost, deliberate and unspeaking. When she ventured out, it was always under the veil of dusk. Emma didn't seek pity, and she certainly didn't grant forgiveness. She carried herself differently now, more solid but not heavy. Her silence had weight to it. She walked with her arms close to her body, head level, gaze down but not lowered. Men didn't call her name anymore. Women didn't ask how she was holding up. That absence of cruelty, of kindness, was louder than scorn. Behind her house, smoke curled at odd hours. Children dared each other to sneak close and peek through the slats of the fence, but they never stayed long. Rumors bloomed in the void. They said she was building something. Others said she was losing her mind, baking loaves by the dozen and burning them just to watch the crusts blacken. Mrs. Headley swore she saw Emma moving bricks under moonlight, stacking them with cracked hands, Sleeves rolled high, blood on her apron. No one offered help. Not after what Henry Finch had done. Everyone knew what happened to those who got between Finch and what he believed he owned. Emma was finished with waiting for rescue. Then, one evening, as the wind turned sharp and the light thinned early, a wagon rattled into town. The horse was lean, like its driver, a tall man with dark sun-worn skin and gray at his temples. He wore a simple brown coat, patched at the elbow, and carried only two things, a bedroll and a book. John Mercer didn't ask for directions. He didn't shake hands. He simply paid for the keys to the abandoned barn with quiet coins and the kind of gaze that didn't linger. For days he saw no one, worked alone, kept to himself. But sometimes, as he whittled by lantern light outside the barn, he'd glance toward Emma's small house. Not long, just enough to notice that hers was the only chimney with smoke at night, and the only window that never opened. The first time John Mercer saw Emma Whitlow in the flesh, she wasn't doing anything remarkable. She was placing a pie into the window of the church's poor box, ginger crust with sugared edges. Her hands moved with practiced grace, sleeves rolled to the elbow, one finger bandaged, likely burned. She didn't linger to be seen, just placed it gently like laying down something sacred, and walked off with a quiet dignity that didn't beg for recognition. John didn't speak to her. Not then. He'd already watched how others did, how the butcher stiffened when she entered his shop and pretended not to notice her waiting, how the banker's wife turned her back on her at the dry goods counter and spoke louder, as if Emma had vanished. How the pastor, once warm in tone, now looked over her head entirely when they passed on the road. He understood the language of small cruelties, of silence weaponized. So he watched differently, watched how she tied her shawl twice before leaving the house, watched how her eyes scanned the street not with fear, but calculation, choosing when to walk, where not to linger. Watched how she stacked bricks behind her shed in perfect rows, laying them one by one into a low, curved dome that smoked each morning before sunrise. The oven, built with cracked palms and blistered knuckles, now fed the same town that let her bleed in chains. He saw the gate, too, the one they'd tied her to. The town had painted over it since, but he noticed how Emma never looked at it directly when she passed. Just the corner of her mouth would tighten for a breath, and then release. One morning, he dropped a bundle of kindling at her porch before dawn. Nothing said, no note. The next day, she left a small parcel of butter biscuits on the steps of his barn, wrapped in muslin and tied with blue thread. Days turned into a rhythm. When her fence sagged, he fixed it. When she returned from market, she found a pail of clean nails by the steps. He brought her Wuthering Heights one day, not because he thought she needed it, but because the binding was soft and the pages worn, like it had already known sorrow and survived. "Looks like something you might already know," he said, offering it without eye contact. She took it, thumbed the cover once, and for a long time said nothing. But a week later, when he passed her by the bakery shelf, she murmured, almost inaudibly, "You don't look at me like the rest of them." He paused, then answered, "Maybe they forgot what strength looks like when it's quiet." The next day, the bakery shelf he built for her appeared in the general store, low enough for the children to reach. And inside her mailbox, beneath a layer of dust and last year's leaves, lay a small charm carved from cherry wood. An open gate, and nothing else. The sky on the first Sunday of April wore a hush, pale and open, the kind of sky that made you pause before stepping out your door. The dogwoods bloomed like quiet forgiveness, soft white petals edged in pink, clustered like prayers around the worn edges of Ash Hollow's churchyard. Winter had finally loosened its grip, and with it, something colder. The silence that had wrapped itself around Emma Whitlow's name for nearly a year. The new iron gate gleamed dark and unbent in the morning light. Townsfolk stood in small clusters around it, murmuring about the craftsmanship, the expense, the pastor's insistence that the town move forward. No one mentioned what the last gate had witnessed. No one needed to. Emma arrived alone, but not unnoticed. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, homemade, hem just brushing her boots. Her hair was pinned with care, one silver clip catching the sunlight as she approached. In her hands, a wooden charm, sanded smooth, the size of her palm. Carved into it, the shape of an open gate, the bars parted like arms. John Mercer stood nearby, just outside the circle of the crowd. He didn't reach for her, didn't smile, but his presence was steady, like the ground beneath her steps. Emma didn't ask for attention. She didn't raise her voice or unfold a speech. She walked to the gate, eyes steady, and lifted the charm with both hands. She tied it with a thin ribbon of homespun thread to the middle bar, where her wrists had once bled against iron. Then she turned, voice clear but low. Some gates are meant to protect, not imprison. The words landed with a stillness that echoed beyond the silence. No applause followed, just breath held, heads lowered. And then she turned, walked back through the crowd, and took John's hand without ceremony. They left the churchyard together, feet slow but certain, as if they had nothing more to prove to anyone. By summer, a new oven stood behind her home, arched brick, copper-doored, built to last. The garden beside it bloomed with lavender and thyme, and above the bakery sign hung a wind chime made of spoons and iron scraps. Customers returned, cautious at first, but Emma never turned anyone away. Not the mayor's wife, not the pastor, not even the girl who had once laughed behind her hand the day Emma was chained. Because Emma didn't bake bread for revenge. She baked it to feed a town that had starved itself of decency. And in that act, quiet and constant, the town was fed something more than flour and crust. It was fed the memory of who she had always been, and who they still had time to become.